So we are joined this evening by a multi-award-winning team who for decades have created and broadcast large-scale national and international events. The BBC Studios events production team is renowned across the global television and event industry for, it says here flawless, I'm going to say usually flawless, an inspiring way that they manage to capture history, unite audiences, and push creative and technological capabilities. The eyes of the world are watching, and there are no second takes, as you all know. They're responsible for award-winning coverage of royal weddings, Remembrance Weekend, ringing in the new year with the London fireworks and the Invictus Games, among others. Let's just take a little look at some of the work that they've brought to our screens. So business as usual is daunting enough, but we are here tonight to focus on an unprecedented 11 months that became a culmination of every royal, ceremonial and commemorative event that the team had covered to date, some coverage of which, of course, you've just been reminded of. In June of 2022, Queen Elizabeth II became the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. BBC Studios events delivered 15 hours of live programming across 4 days. It was joyous appointment to view with a reach of 28.5 million, rising to 39 million with global and social audiences taken into account. It says here the press reported audience reaction as magical and phenomenal. I'm sure they said some other things as well. Just months later, celebration turned to commemoration as the team brought a 9-hour broadcast of the state funeral to more than 200 countries, an event that was simultaneously years and also mere days in the planning. The marathon achievement of both events saw Claire Popplewell and her team recognised with an Outstanding Contribution Award from the RTS, a special recognition award from Broadcast, and 3 BAFTAs. This was all before the latest crowning moment of bringing the 2 most watched broadcasts of the year so far to the screens, with the coronation of Their Majesties Charles III and Queen Camilla, and then the Coronation concert. So I'm thrilled to say that everyone who has joined me on stage tonight played pivotal roles in delivering the images of all these events. So starting from my far left is Nigel Catmur. Nigel is an RTS and BAFTA award-winning lighting director. He was the lighting director on the Platinum Party at the Palace, the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II from Westminster Abbey, and the Coronation concert, including Lighting Up the Nation, and his wider credits include The Wheel and Britain's Got Talent. Chris Stent is a line producer, an experienced line producer with a passion for live broadcasting and multi-camera television. He specialises in overseas productions and large-scale events. Chris was a line producer on the Coronation concert of King Charles III. That was his first time working with BBC Studio Events Productions. Wider credits include Race Across the World, Soccer Aid, SAS, Who Dares Wins, and The Jump. Simon Staffurth is a director, an award-winning director of entertainment and live event shows. He directed Trooping the Colour and the Platinum Pageant across the Jubilee weekend, alongside the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth from Buckingham Palace and the coronation of His Majesty King Charles at Westminster Abbey. Wider credits include the Beijing and Tokyo Olympics opening and closing ceremonies, Michael McIntyre's Big Show, and The Masked Singer. Which brings me to the team, I'm going to use words you're going to hate now, the team's inspirational leader, and she surely is, Supremo Extraordinaire Claire Popplewell. Claire Popplewell CVO is responsible for running the events department at BBC Studios Productions, leading the planning and execution of all royal, ceremonial and commemorative programming. A multi-award-winning creative, Claire has delivered global events including the royal wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton, the Earthshot Prize, the Royal British Legion Festival of Remembrance, the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and most recently, the coronation of Their Majesties King Charles III and Queen Camilla, and the Coronation concert. And she is still smiling. Claire, when you were watching that, I mean, I haven't watched that footage back, and it got my heart going. When you were watching it, what were you thinking? What were the highlights?
I'll be honest, there's a huge sense of relief. If
Yes.
I'm really honest, relief that we delivered and we got it right. Pride that just the quality of that footage, and it, you know, is the genuine team effort that does that. And I think just pride in terms of the teams we work with. You know, yes, I run the events team, but we expand and contract depending on what we're doing, and we are so fortunate to, I genuinely believe, working with some of the best people in the business, whether that's the craft teams, or the camera, the sound, the riggers, or the editorial team, and just the best production management, genuinely, you could ever dream to work with. And everything you saw on that screen, no matter which event it was, all of those people come together as one. And it's just a huge privilege, A, to have the opportunity to make those events, but to work with people at the top of their craft. Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah, let's concentrate then. You know, we're here to talk about these three events that happened in quick succession. So let's go back to the Platinum Jubilee. It seems like about 25 years ago now. Do you have a standout memory from that weekend, or?
It has to probably be the concert, and I think within the concert has to be Paddington. Okay. It's when you're so in it, you don't actually appreciate how big something is going to be. And the reaction off the back of that concert, once we saw a rough cut, we were like, this is good. And then, you know, when it comes together, you know, within the concert, and we didn't at that point know whether the Queen, you know, when we first started planning the Jubilee, she was obviously 96. Yeah. She was going to fewer and fewer events. So when we put the Jubilee together, every event we did was, how do we weave her narrative through, whether she's there or not, what will be appropriate. And we sort of took a very good guess that it was unlikely that the Queen would be at that concert, given it was 4 days. I mean, I know how tired we were, let alone at the age of 96. So Paddington came about because we, you know, took that guess that she wasn't going to be there. And just the reaction, and it's so special. I love it.
So it's very interesting, actually, to get a little glimpse of you saying that, and I remember in the conversations, the production conversations we had, the idea that you needed to weave the narrative of this remarkable lady through the whole weekend. So were there any other challenges particularly where you thought, you know, in terms of the sort of timing of that and when you understood what your programme was going to look like?
Not really. I mean, I suppose it's each event over that Jubilee we were determined would have its own identity. Yeah. And we were really clear on that. And that, to a certain extent, then drove the narrative. And once you've made that decision, if it comes naturally, you're normally on the right path. So we had Trooping the Colours, so we made that day very much about the Queen's relationship with the military. St Paul's Cathedral, it was her, you know, her and her faith. And it went on, the party was one big celebration, and then the pageant was ultimately the nation coming together and her relationship with each of, you know, ultimately her people. Once we had that, but I think what was more challenging was just understanding on a day-to-day basis. We didn't know whether or not she would or wouldn't be coming. You know, but what was lovely is whether it still felt like her celebration of the nation, which is what we managed to achieve.
Nigel, I want to ask you specifically at the end of the concert, the Jubilee concert. I remember we bumped into each other, and I hadn't, obviously, you know, our roles don't at all collide. But I said to you, knowing you were the lighting director, the first thing I did was congratulate you. And I said, where did that all begin? Because it was such an incredible creative display across the front of the palace. It was really breathtaking. And you looked at me and you said, about 31 years ago. And I really...
I can't remember.
Yeah, we were all in a bit of a fog. But for me, that was a brilliant description of the fact that, sort of speaking exactly to what Claire's talking about, that everything you'd done professionally was kind of leading. Yeah. It felt like leading to that moment where you were able to realise something truly spectacular.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was very much experience-led, because you know, you go into that concert, you've got no idea if it's going to be raining, if it's going to be bright sunny days, or what the parameters are. And so much of what we do from a lighting perspective is a lot on instinct on those types of shows. There's a huge amount of planning, obviously, with the projection, the drones, and etc. But a lot of it is very reactionary on the day.
Can you tell me more about that? Because that seems so extraordinary for something that looks... I mean, even when I was sitting in studio watching it, and none of us, of course, had seen it in its entirety, it looks absolutely meticulous. So what do you mean by
got away with it then?
Yeah.
I mean, in essence, all the lighting is programmed. It's programmed to flash in time with the music and react to the colours of the projection, and etc. But the level at which we're balancing people's faces, because lighting for TV you have to get a balance on the face with the background. If the face is too bright, background too dark, it looks odd. If the and vice versa.
Okay.
And that balance is very much happening real time.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of what I mean in terms of it being very organic.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the drones? Because, I mean, that obviously, in terms of the way it has to happen at a certain time, and you know that sunset's going to be at a certain time.
Yep.
So to that extent, it's predictable.
Yeah.
What are the various challenges around incorporating the light display of drones as you did at the Palace?
It's very much with the drones team, which I think was Sky Magic, wasn't it? They, along with the brief from the producers and production team, go off and create the visuals. And then we get to see that. And we are then, it was relatively unique in the projection and the drones were interacting. So, for example, there was, like the swan. The swan was flying over the palace and and things like that. So that was relatively new in terms of the technology. We've seen drone shows, we've seen projection, but to get them to interact on the right camera shot was quite early on. I mean, it's happened a lot more since, of course. But in terms, effectively, they take off, they get a go, which there's quite a good story about that. When comms breaks down and it's on a mobile phone, go now. I kid you not. And they take off and they do their thing. And it's literally the guy who's operating it, arm the drones and then go. And 20 minutes later, the drone show is finished. So there's no direct contact and syncing with it.
Once it goes, it goes.
Yeah, so it's very much a self-contained element.
So in terms of your sort of career progression to the point where you work up, I mean, I was saying, there are no second chances, you can't fix it in the edit. I mean, what has given you the appetite, or some might say sickness, to work on something that is live and has those, has those very big audiences and very big moments, and there are no second chances?
I think it's the challenge. It's the challenge to, you get away with it, you're still here, aren't you?
Yeah.
If we hadn't got away with it, none of us would be sitting here. I think there is that challenge, and it'll always finish on time, which is good. No overruns. It must be a slightly masochistic feeling as well, of wanting to take that on.
Okay.
But yeah, I can't really articulate that, to be honest with you.
Okay, so we've got a clip here which I think is one of your highlights. Can you just, before we run it, can you tell us what it is about this, the Celeste clip? What is it about it that particularly...
So the clip I've got is 3 sections. It's to show that doing a concert in darkness is one thing. Doing a concert that goes from daylight through to darkness, from a lighting perspective, is a relatively challenging thing. Okay. Because you want the lighting to have impact in daylight, and then you want it to be elegant and beautiful, and have impact, of course, if the music dictates it, when it gets dark. And the gamut of performance types on these type of concerts, it's not just rock and roll full way through.
Yeah.
We had the Royal Ballet come in, so suddenly you've got to do some beautiful theatrical style lighting and make it look very elegant.
Chris, I want, just while we're on the subject of the Coronation concert, I was watching the Robbie Williams incredible, I think it's a four-part documentary on Netflix last night. And I was looking at all his backstage production villages, and they were pretty, Nebworth, pretty nice, Leeds, not so bad. None of them were as extraordinary as the Coronation concert. This full production village, it was like a whole sort of little town, very glamorous little town in itself. Where did you start with knowing who you had to provide what for, and what were the particular logistical challenges of backstage at that concert?
It was incredibly challenging, because that location, I don't think you could design a location less suited to putting a concert on.
Okay.
Putting Glastonbury on in the back garden of the King was quite a challenge. And what we discovered quite quickly when we got there was nowhere was flat. Absolutely nowhere on this land was flat enough, and we needed to put 50 porter cabins and dressing rooms and build all these camera platforms and stands. So that was definitely one of the challenges. That the site itself was an incredibly challenging site to work in. It's just so vast, and we had, I think it was 1,700 vehicles and deliveries that we needed to get through onto the site. But it was one of the things that we needed to put in place to make sure that everything else could fall into place. It's so crucial to have that infrastructure there, and that extended from dressing rooms and space like that to toilets, plumbing facilities,
Yeah.
concessions and welfare for 22,000 people. I think it was over 600 performers as well, and all this space that we needed in a very, very restrictive area. So it took a huge team to sort of plan all that out.
600 performers, that's
Yeah.
astonishing. And I'm thinking, because they always strike me, these backstage areas, as not particularly environmentally friendly. I mean, you're looking at something that, you know, it's a pop-up and then it's gone. How did you manage that? And what were the commitments around that?
Yeah, it was something we set out to do straight away. It's a big push in the events department, but also, you know, if you think about who we were doing this concert for, it's so important to the King as well. So it was something we set out to do straight away. So we looked at all sorts of opportunities to engage with the community. So there was a lot of, we used as much recyclable materials as we could for the set and the structures, and a lot of that was either donated afterwards or recycled. We worked with our catering company to ensure that things like our food was as sustainable as possible. We used locally sourced products. We had a big push on vegetarian food and very aware of the carbon footprint. And that kind of extended out to everything. We ran a lot of the concert on battery power rather than generators. We had generators there, but we ran the majority of it on battery power. And that was just sort of crucial in succeeding what we did, which was basically we reduced the carbon footprint prediction. We'd sort of reduced it by 70% compared to the predicted carbon footprint for a concert like that.
And you're probably not going to go into sort of detailed costs with me, but is that a very difficult, is it far more costly to try to run something that's environmental?
It is, yeah, it's costly, and it's also just very challenging. You know, that amount of battery power, there aren't that many batteries to source. And things like when we were using fuel, we went for HVO fuel, which is much more sustainable, but that's very challenging to get hold of. We were having discussions with local fuel stations about how we could try and, you know, direct a lot of our deliveries to make use of those. So it's a big challenge, but one that was really worth it to be able to put on such a sustainable event.
So 600 performers, who had the trickiest rider?
I don't think I'm allowed to say. Oh, no, actually, we were really lucky. Everyone was really lovely. And one of the production teams worked really hard to make that backstage area as lovely and welcoming as possible. We actually spoke to local schools in the Windsor area, and they provided pictures. So Tommy, aged 4, drew a picture of the King, and it was all hung up in the sort of production village.
Yeah, I saw them.
So it was really lovely, really lovely environment that the team worked on.
Simon, let me come to you then. You've worked with Claire. Tripping the Colour is something you've worked on for lots of years, and also I gave only a few of your credits there. It strikes me it's a very particular sort of director that gets in, live director that says, I'll get involved in something where there are, 213 cameras for the Coronation. Can you say that without your hands shaking? What does it take? What does it take to want to do multi-camera and then some?
Well, live events are great. I enjoy doing them. There's the buzz of a live event. If I can just say, just sometimes people get confused about what the director does and what a producer does. Sure. If I can just explain it, most people will know, but just so everybody does know.
Sure.
So the director is the person that sits in the outside broadcast truck. There's a big wall of monitors. All the cameras come in, so I see all the cameras all the time. I'm talking to the cameraman, the soundmen, the presenters, the floor managers, the vision control, the lighting. So everybody's listening to the director, and I'm calling each cut as it happens for the live show. But each show is slightly different. So the Troop in the Colour, for instance, it's more or less the same show every year.
Yeah.
We've done it for a number of years.
Yeah.
And we know what's going to happen. It's the same action.
Yeah.
It's almost like a live drama. Somebody has a command, there's a reaction.
Yeah.
We know which person that is, we know where they're going to stand. And so over the years, we've tightly scripted it.
Yeah.
So my script is that deep of shots all the way through it, because we know at that point he's going to say a command, and I know which camera that's going to be. So we go through the whole show as a script with shot numbers, some music, but a lot of commands. But the challenge for me is we never rehearse it.
Yeah.
We never actually, because there is no rehearsal. What we do is we watch previous year's tape with all the camera crew, and we sit around and we go, that's shot 1, that's shot 2. that man with feathers in his hat, that's whoever it may be.
Yeah.
And we literally look at the show and watch it, and on the day, we just do it. So that's a huge challenge to the director, because if one camera hasn't got the right person at the right time, well, no, don't take that, or whatever. So that's the challenge. So Troop in the Colour is tightly scripted. We do it the same, and that's the show. The pageant that I did 3 days later was the complete opposite.
Yeah.
There was virtually no script, because it was an event that was happening. So it was a very different live event. It was something that was happening in front of us. Cars were coming past, the military were coming past, and that's very much reacting to see what's going on, what's the best shot. We obviously knew there were certain areas that we were concentrating on, but it's happening in front of us.
And how much at the time is that your call? I mean, obviously, editorially, you've got an exec producer in the gallery with you, and they are direct, you know, they might give you a little bit of advice here, or we're looking for more of that, how much is it your shout in the moment?
So the difference in live events to other shows is, I think it's true to say that the director acts more as a producer, director, than in other shows. So I do other shows, and there'll be several producers behind me telling me what to do.
What a delight for you.
Sometimes too many. But on a live show, you can't have that chain of command.
Yeah.
So the director is very much more tuned into the editorial side of what's right and what's not right, what the tone of the programme is, and of course there are comments that do come, but you know, it's happening. So you're reacting to what you're seeing. On the pageant, there were, you know, we knew certain things were happening, so we knew in advance what things we were going to do, but nevertheless we reacted to it.
What were some of the surprises then? Can you remember any from the pageant? I mean, I know it probably seems like a long time ago now.
One amusing surprise was that I think it was we had a load of vintage cars come through, and there's various Jags, and in one of them was Prue Leith, and the Jag broke down.
Oh yeah.
And so some stewards came and were pushing it. Now, so that's where the director's reacting needs to have the support and of the camera crew.
Yeah.
Because the camera crew are very much the eyes and ears of what's going on. I'm sitting in a truck. I can't see what's happening.
Yeah.
So you rely on the camera team to give you these shots. So when I see Prue Leith being pushed by stewards, yes, we've got to have that.
Gold dust.
Gold dust, as it was pushed past the royal box. So that was, yeah.
Have there been, I hope this isn't an unfair question, but is there any point at which you have felt in any of those three events your nerves wobble and think, God,
I think the Coronation was my most nervous.
Yeah.
Not at the time, because we were on air a long time before the Coronation. We went on air at 7:30.
Yeah.
The Coronation went to 11. So there's plenty of time to get warmed up and seeing people come in. It was all fairly relaxed, and then actually before you know it, everybody's arriving and you're actually doing the main Coronation. It was really only at the end I thought, thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
Oh, because I didn't want to miss the hat going on its head. You know?
Yes, that would have been a tragedy. Yes.
And for that, again, a very different show, or a show, an event, because it hadn't happened for.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. So when you say, well, trooping the colour, we know each year, we go back, we look at all those years. Not so, because obviously no. I can't remember how many cameras. There were like 18 cameras or something in the Queen Elizabeth's Coronation, compared with the amount that you had. Yeah. So I mean, how many cameras did you have?
We looked at the footage and we saw where the camera positions were, and actually thought, all right, well they had a camera there. Well, clearly we need to have a camera there.
Okay.
The staging for the Coronation, they call it the Coronation Theatre, which is the centre of Westminster Abbey, with the throne. Well, there were two thrones, of course. It was different. Yeah. And the coronation chair. And unlike any other Abbey service where the priest is standing in front of the altar facing the congregation, this was all staged completely the other way. All the key members were all facing the altar. So for us, we don't normally have cameras there. So we had to get in. In the end, we put 8 new camera positions around the coronation chair to make sure that we got the shots of crowning. And so that was going there, having a look at where we could put cameras, We obviously wanted to hide them. We didn't want them to be obvious.
Yeah.
We then had to get permission to have these cameras because obviously we don't want them in the way. One we managed to put on the top of the altar screen, and luckily there were beautiful flowers there, and they managed to kind of virtually hide the camera, so you'd never know it was there. And we did tests with the cameras as well to make sure we got the right angle. And 8 cameras might sound like a lot to look at 2 people doing that, but in fact, I used every single camera all the time because there were so many people involved in the coronation. In that, it was actually quite a small area, it's quite a tight area, and the shot I thought I was going to get on one angle, oh no, the Dean's standing in front of that camera.
Yeah.
I'll take it on another angle. So I needed all those cameras, and they were there. And additionally, because these cameras were remote cameras, what we call hot heads. So a hot head is a pan and tilt and zoom camera, and the operator is actually sitting in the truck next to me, who's in the next room, or the operators, because we had a lot of them. So they work very well, but it's technology that might not work or might break down. There's nobody physically by the camera if it does break down. So I needed extra, or I needed to make sure I had enough cameras to cover in case something went wrong.
Nigel, what are the particular challenges then of lighting inside the Abbey? I mean, what is it you're trying to do? Obviously, if you walk into it, it's an incredibly atmospheric and beautiful thing, but cameras and lighting do funny things. What is it you're trying to communicate with lighting in that very particular theatre, as we heard it called?
So, I mean, in simplest terms, it's visibility,
Okay.
and we don't want it to feel lit for the people in there. I mean, obviously it is lit because there's loads of lights up there.
Yeah.
But it needs to feel comfortable because obviously it's a very big day for a particular person, and they shouldn't feel like they're bunny in the headlights.
Yeah.
So it's trying to keep it rounded and make it just feel natural. We don't want anyone talking about the coronation at the Abbey going, well, lovely lighting or spectacular lighting.
Yes.
It should just be visible and provide illumination for the cameras at the right angle, at the right balance and everything.
So it's quite a technical...
It's surprisingly technical, yeah.
Okay. And Claire, what about that idea of invisibility? 2 things I'm thinking about here. So we've heard about cameras, sound as well. I mean, music was a very big part of that, but also it's really important for people at home. I mean, we're always trying to make people feel as if they're in the front row of the experience. What were the challenges, other particular challenges within the Abbey to make people feel like they heard the words, they understood what was going on in quite an arcane and complex set of circumstances?
I'd say, and the direction and lighting, I actually think the guys that had the biggest challenge was the sound team.
Right.
People aren't standing there on floor mics, they're all slung from the ceiling. How do you get that balance? You've got people processing, you've got choirs, in places we've never had choirs before. You also had the King and crucial members of the royal family and the clergy who were speaking that we needed to hear. Both the people in the Abbey needed to hear them on PA, but we also needed to hear them at home. So we spent a long time negotiating where we could put microphones that ultimately were discreet. So, the kneeler, how do you ultimately capture the King saying his oath? He's not going to wear a radio mic. No. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's those kind of things, and nor was the Prince of Wales. So it's where can we put microphones in those discreet places that will give us what we need, but ultimately aren't intrusive.
And what then about, editorially, and I remember that at the time, obviously, there was a lot of discussion. It was an interesting thing to talk about that moment when, because essentially you've got one person's very private and, I'm imagining, profound experience of the coronation, and that's His Majesty the King, multi-millions around the world watching it, the moment when there isn't access and we're not allowed to watch. How difficult is that to negotiate in terms of how you make televisual sense of it, and also that it's explainable without people feeling like they're missing an important part of the story, because essentially it's a story we're telling.
Yeah, the only element we didn't film, which was private, was the anointing, which was the same for Queen Elizabeth at her coronation. It was that private moment between ultimately the King and God and his anointing, and that was always and always has been off limits. We were lucky at that point. There are people to look at. I mean, Simon, who was directing, the choir was singing. You've got Zadok the priest. You've got the biggest, most iconic music at that point. So that's just ultimately your time in terms of storytelling. You're not hiding from the fact it's going on. We can shoot.
Yes.
We could shoot the screen. You can see that it's private. But ultimately, we're filming the choir, we're filming the people looking on, and ultimately it was private for everybody in the Abbey. It wasn't as if the viewers at home were being kept out. Nobody saw it. So I think apart from the Archbishop of Canterbury, that was it. It was just that one-on-one moment. So for his family, for all the dignitaries, for everybody in the Abbey, nobody could see it. So ultimately, we are giving the viewers at home, to a certain extent, the same experience as those watching.
Simon, you want to come in?
Well, I was just going to say, we obviously had all these cameras upstage so we could look in and see into the screen. So at that moment, when the screens went up, I very clearly told all the cameramen to pan off. So all those cameras panned away, they panned to the ceiling, they panned wherever, so that in our truck, we never saw it, the cameraman never saw it. Basically, we didn't see, we maintained that privacy. And then at the crucial time when the screens are breaking up, come back.
Yeah. And why was that important to you? Was that important to you because you felt it was a respectful thing, or was it simply we don't want any footage that shouldn't be out there getting out there?
I mean, both, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there is no way that we should be seeing that, and there's no way anybody should be taking a picture of that because it is a private thing. So it's a respect. It's a respect for their privacy.
Okay. Claire, then that just leads me to thinking a little bit more about the funeral of the late Queen, and that, in a sense, that sums up so much of what we've been saying. That was the ultimate event where, of course, it was entirely unprecedented because this was a woman who held the place that she held in the nation's heart, and there was, so much of your working life had been working up to planning that and to making sure that it was done properly. It was a very, very important thing to get right. It's maybe unfair of me to ask you about the pressure of that, but surely the pressure of that must have been immense.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
But you are working with a team who care as much as I did. So every cameraman, every producer, every director, everybody wanted to get it right. So it was ultimately at that point, yes, I'm, giving words of advice to Simon and the team from the back row, but you are reliant on a team of people who are following a brief that you've given, who are reacting at the time. And they had a very clear brief from us. I felt very strongly there should be, we needed to remember, yes, it was a national event. The Queen was, dear to us all, but it was ultimately a family funeral where, there was a family saying goodbye to their mother and grandmother, and that needed to be respected throughout. So whilst in our storytelling through pictures and through the sound, I hope we never crossed that line. Do you know what I mean? We were bringing it home to the people at home and to the millions around the world, but at the back of our minds all the time was ultimately, it was a family, and, what a horrendous position to a certain extent to be in, to say goodbye to your mother and grandmother on such a public stage. And I think that was at the back of all of our minds throughout.
And Nigel, what about that? Because the stuff that we've talked about is that very kind of showbiz thing. You were saying, well, the lighting shouldn't even be discernible at the Coronation. There was a very, very different brief, of course, when it came to the concerts, the Jubilee concerts. The state funeral, to be lighting director of something as significant as that, how great are the conversations about tone and the thought of the creativity that goes into that and how you can influence the atmosphere?
Yeah, it's very critical, but as Claire just said, everybody working and all the teams that we work with, I want to say they're handpicked, they've evolved and gravitated to these jobs, and they all care so much, and they're all thinking with the same mindset. So in terms of, the classic thing, obviously we do the concerts and we got thousands of cues, lights flashing and chasing, and you're just praying for good weather. On this, you've got barely any cues, and you're just praying for the lights to stay on for the 4.7 billion that are watching it, and we sort of we always try and reassure ourselves in these events, or say, well, we've messed up bigger shows than this, but to be honest,
no.
that one kind of stretched that a bit. So it's finding the right tone, and it is ultimately we have done so many services at the Abbey. And we've used them over the years as sort of little rehearsal elements for what was coming, which we always knew. Okay. So we were well prepared.
So if I was to ask each of you in turn, then I'll start with you, Nigel. Over the three different events, when you think of the moment when the job was well done, or when you think of your personal highlight, what would it be?
Lionel Richie. at the Coronation concert.
Yeah, it was a
It was
remarkable.
just a moment.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and the lights staying on for the funeral.
Okay. Chris, what about you?
Funny enough, Lionel Richie was one of mine as well. I remember two things. One was on the night we turned around and the King was up and dancing, which was quite something. But I remember the night before we were doing the dress rehearsal, and it was the first time we'd really sort of seen everything go, at full pelt. And just sort of looking around in the grounds of Windsor Castle, just like a private concert, basically. And then you watched it and you thought, yeah, this is going to work. All of this stuff on paper, it was going to work. And it really did feel like it in that moment.
Simon, for you, is there a single highlight?
I think it must be the Coronation. And I think I feel so privileged to have been there and directed that historic moment. To see the crowning happening in front of me, that was, well, I'm never going to do it again.
No.
That's absolutely a one-off. So but I'm very proud of that moment.
Okay. Claire?
It is the funeral.
Right.
And in honesty, it was your closing link. It was the Paddington line. And you've got to remember, everyone talks about the Queen's funeral and that, 9-hour broadcast. For us, it's actually been 10 days of a major event, almost every single day. Events in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and then Proclamation and the lying in state that was 23 hours live. And I'd held it together for 10 days, and it was at your closing link, I have to say, the tears rolled, and that relief of, we've done it. It's, we've done well. And that was the point that you got me. But I think I realised, actually, we'd done a good job.
Yeah. And have you felt since a sort of burden lifted? I mean, in a way, because so much of your working life had been about knowing that at some point this moment would come, when you felt that all of your team and these people that you'd amassed had done justice to the event over those 10 days, and that is an absolute marathon. Have you sort of spent the time since kind of breathing out a little bit?
Not immediately, because we went straight on, ultimately, to our bread and butter. We went on to the Remembrance Weekend, the Cenotaph, Festive Remembrance and Christmas, and then we're straight into the Coronation, which ultimately we didn't really start planning the Coronation until January to deliver, in real time 4 months later, because it was the beginning of May. It was this summer. This summer was that moment of, I can go on holiday. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And the phone doesn't need to be on all the time. So it was this summer that I did breathe out. But it wasn't, you'd think it would be sort of the week after. It wasn't. No. It was months after.
Okay. Thank you all for sharing all that. I'm going to open to the floor if anybody's got questions. And if I can just ask you, before you give your question, just say where you're from so as we know. Yeah, hi, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Andrew Eborn, Octopus TV. Brilliant insight, and many congratulations to each of you on what must be life-changing, I imagine, for each and every one. You scraped briefly about the relationship between you and the palace, which must be a very delicate thing to handle. Could you shine a little bit more light on that and any specific instructions that you were given?
There were no specific instructions from the palace. The only instruction we had was that the anointing was private for the Coronation. Yes, we work closely, but no closer than we do with every organisation we work with as event producers. So the Royal British Legion or the military, it's the same event, but there were no instructions. Ultimately, we are told what is happening for the Coronation. We're covering their event, and that's it.
And the military stuff, I mean, whenever I would hear you in production meetings talk about the scale of the military stuff is absolutely mind-boggling. I remember when we went on air and it was... just after, as you said, it was about 7:30 in the morning of the Coronation, even coordinating with the military about the amount of military personnel who were coming into London that day and the cameras we would need to cover that. I mean, give us an idea of the scale of that sort of...
I think it was the largest military procession they've ever staged in London. It was certainly bigger than the Queen's funeral. I think was it 2 or 3 times the size? I mean, they had troops from all over the world. They were representing the Commonwealth.
So you all need to be talking to each other all the time to understand the breadth of the demands there.
Yeah, it's ultimately what are their plans. As Simon said, who was saying which command where. The fact that the troops came in by train was actually a lovely part of the narrative of that Coronation morning. We captured them coming off at Waterloo, and then they went to their various barracks. Understanding that, They were forming up while the service was going on, so each of the different directors are ultimately looking at their moment. But, you know, in terms of that procession, yes, there's a Gold State carriage, but you've got all the different armed forces that we have, but also the story of the Commonwealth troops. So understanding who is where and what you're going to make sure you're representing the scale of what they've put on is really important.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Hi, Daniel Toole from Ajax. I have to admit, I used to be at the BBC. So before I ask my question, I would like to say that I think nowhere does this kind of thing better than the BBC, and I've had a big global job for a long time. So congratulations, but the industry's changed quite a lot. And I had a question about how you approach this now that a lot of things that used to be in-house, when I was there, I think, I can't call it studios now, post-production, outside broadcast was all in-house. And now they're out of house. And I guess you're working with more partners and third-party organizations than you used to. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about how that is operationally, more to coordinate, but also how those relationships have evolved with your, I guess, what are now suppliers in the freelance market versus doing this 30, 40 years ago.
So to a certain extent, we're also out of house. We're BBC Studios Productions. We're not BBC Public Service. So no, but it's a very different world. You know, we ultimately, BBC Public Service are our client, that we are producing the funeral on their behalf. So that is one relationship. All the outside, when I first started, we had, you know, the BBC, I was part of the BBC, was, you know, it was a outside broadcast fleet. You're right, it's a freelance market now. We're lucky that a lot of the outside broadcast companies want to work with the BBC. You know, like you say, I believe that we are the best in the business. And in terms of our outside broadcast, the crews, they chose to work with us over that weekend. Ultimately, there were 3 broadcasters. They weren't in the end. They're actually, for the Queen's funeral, there was actually only us, and we supplied the feed to BBC and Sky and ITN. But you develop it with every event we do, whether it's state opening of Parliament, the King's birthday parade, New Year's Eve fireworks. They're all outside broadcast companies that ultimately you develop those relationships with, whether it's their engineering team or, you know, the VT team. It's a freelance market, and it's as open as anything.
Chris, I just want to ask you a little bit about that, because the complexity of that, I'm guessing that when it comes to something that is a huge event like these 3 events where you don't think this is the time to try out something. You're going to established partners, you're going to people that you've worked with and who are tried and tested in such an environment.
Yeah, I think it's about building those relationships up over years, like you said, Nigel. You know, everything kind of builds towards these scale of events. But yeah, we did. You know, you turn to trusted partners and people that you've worked with before. But actually, another good point is that, you know, things do change, and there's a lot of new people in the industry and new sort of suppliers. So it was kind of getting a good balance. But I think one of the biggest things is getting the team right and the people. You know, it is one of the biggest challenges that we face, especially in the concert, is surrounding yourself with all the best people, whether that's in the production team or your suppliers and your heads of department. You know, we couldn't have done those shows without reaching out to those people.
And would you agree with Claire that the advantage is people want the gig because it's very prestige and it's a huge audience and it's a great feather to have in their cap?
I mean, it's just the most extraordinary experience and such a sort of an honour to be part of something so monumental. So yeah, it is. It's really beneficial to work on something like that because it's what we all want to do. It's kind of, you know, the pinnacle of careers. It's what we all want to do. So that does really help get the best people.
I'm wondering, we're all of a certain vintage and you're not. So are you sort of thinking, where do I go? Where do I go from here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, what do you do to top it?
Yeah,
just retire now.
Yeah, I think I will. I could never top that day.
More questions? Have we got? Yes, please. Microphone's just behind you. That's great. Thank you.
A vested interest. I have to say I was a previous head of events, but we didn't have any coronations then. Could I just come back to the funeral? Because there's no doubt the coverage was stunning. And from the moment the hearse drove through Deeside to Kirsty at the end, I mean, it really was unbelievable. And I think a special mention actually for the lying in state coverage and the commentary there. But could I come to the service and just ask, you mentioned that the palace didn't actually ask for any constraints. Did you feel there was a need for constraints as to what the director could do when, at any time during the service?
No, I mean, as I say, everybody was briefed just to bear in mind that that ultimately was a family funeral. And I think so long as everybody bear that in mind, I didn't want to see people in distress, no matter who it was, whether it was somebody standing on the streets on the Mall or whether it was somebody in Westminster Abbey or St George's Chapel. It's crossing a line, it's intrusive, and actually I would find it uncomfortable as a viewer, let alone as a producer. So that was sort of the brief I gave all the team.
And Simon, I would say, I'd be very interested to know what you think here, as you explained it so well, that, you know, the role of a live director in such a sharp, pinpoint sharp set of circumstances might that be the difference between the coverage of news covering something that's happening and BBC events covering something? We are covering the event in that sense.
Absolutely.
And so that editorially, there is an infinitesimal difference there. Is that fair?
Yes, I think we're there to cover the event as it's happening. As you say, we're not a news. So if there is something going off in the back street, well, we don't want to see that particularly because that's not part of the event. We want to concentrate on the event. There are news cameras
and
there.
Also in the news, in the knowledge that news cameras are there and that's there, yeah.
So we want to see the best of the event and portray it in the best possible way that we can, I think.
Okay, right, thank you. Yes.
A couple of compliments. Don't worry, Claire. A couple of compliments and one slightly techie question, if I may. I'm even so old, I was head of events before Philip. I don't look it, I know that.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
Just a couple of things, because all of us watch these nuances, and they're both on funerals. The Duke of Edinburgh's funeral and the Queen's funeral at Windsor. That shot of the Piper in the North Choir aisle, going into darkness and then into light, and particularly as you cut the shot in from the choir as went by the arch, absolutely stunning. And I did actually have lunch with one of the canons at Windsor today, and to him, that is something that stands out. Absolutely remarkable. If I can spare your blushes, Kirsty, your peroration at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, wow, outstanding. I never heard anything as good as that.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Just that now for the techie one, Chris. Did you use 5G anywhere in the broadcast chain? I'm thinking particularly on the funerals, and I was wondering about particularly between Balmoral and Edinburgh, because I'm interested whether 5G, because I imagine you were using every resource that was around, and it's somewhere where you might have pushed out into the unknown a little bit.
I actually can't speak for the funeral myself, but in terms of the concert, it is something that we're looking at. We had numerous channels that we were getting the footage out to. We have numerous sort of redundancies and backups on that, so we were using a multiple routes, whether it was through satellite or through internet. And what's great is a lot of these venues, so Windsor Castle, for example, has a box that connects right straight back to Broadcasting House, and so it really allows the technology to, I mean, the magic of television to work. you plug it in and somehow it gets onto everyone's screens. I don't know if anyone else can comment on the funeral, but it's definitely something that is coming.
We did use 5G on the Coronation. I don't think necessarily the funeral. I think the time we had to, ultimately we were just grateful to get on air for the proclamation day one. But certainly the Coronation, I think, is the largest live event in UHD. We pushed the boundaries to make it in UHD. And I think, you know, it was testing when you've got that amount of remote technology. It's tricky. But yeah, UHD came in. It's ultimately, we're capturing history and you want it in the best possible quality you can.
Claire, you actually put it fantastically. I remember in the very early days of the project, and we went and we watched the Queen's coronation, and you put it fantastically. You said, we're about to make the archive of the future. And I think that summed up, and I think that's why it was so important to go for the UHD and push those boundaries.
Just time for, I think, 2 more questions. Yes, yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi there, my name is Nain, I'm from Manchester, and I'm a student. And as someone like myself, I'm developing my skills as a producer, and I'm looking into obviously doing placements and obviously doing things like that. So my question is, like, somebody who's get interested in doing like producing and things like that, what sort of skills would you recommend to refine? And also kind of the second part question, obviously I'm looking into doing small live events as well in my own university, develop my own skills as well. So what would you recommend on a smaller scale to develop those skills as a live producer?
Such a good question.
I would say find an area that you're passionate about in terms of the storytelling you want to make, and whether that is ultimately it's ceremonial, it's military, or whether it could be food, it could be sport, it can be news. Live television is so broad. So I'd say, first of all, find something you're passionate about, because it does slightly take over your life, just be really frank. And if you love it, you don't mind. And then I would say understand all the different skills you can within that skill set. If it's, if you want to be producing, try researching, assistant producing, making the films, and understand what goes into ultimately producing a live event, and understand the technical side as well. It's quite easy, to sit at the back of a truck and ask Simon for X or Y, but having an understanding that actually that's not really going to be possible makes him stop getting quite so cross with you in the truck.
And Chris, I'm wondering, what were your sort of initial baby steps on to the ladder?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and great opportunity, actually, because when you do start out, I started out, as many people do, as a runner in various different television shows. It might be something that you definitely didn't even want to work on, but it's just about taking advantage of that moment. One of the really lucky things that you get as a runner, and actually I still get in the production management chain, is you get to know everyone. So in my role, I have to know everyone. I don't have to know how this works. I need to know who knows how it works. And as a runner, you actually get the opportunity to meet so many people across a whole production, whether it is in technical, whether it's editorial. You get, so take advantage of that. Go and meet and chat to all these people, because that'll help you find the area that you are then passionate about.
I would completely agree with that, because I started as a runner and I was working sort of Scottish First Division football. I had no interest in that, but what I did get to see, and also I knew where the best pies and Bovril were in any stadium in the whole of Scotland, but what it helped me to do was just see everybody's job. And that, there is sort of no substitute for that, and to be able to have a sort of degree of authenticity, to know that you actually do understand what goes into production. So I think I would agree with that advice. I think it's really good. One more question at the back, the lady in the white top.
Mine's more of a planning question, actually. You mentioned before, with regard to kind of using like earlier Abbey events to kind of do mini rehearsals for the funeral, but when the news broke on that Thursday, what was the first thing that kind of went through your mind, and what did you do, and how did the planning process go over the kind of 10 days between the moment the story broke to the funeral itself? What did those days look like?
The first person I rang was our lead production manager, and I can't speak more highly of the production management teams. We all go, it was beautifully directed and fabulously lit. What that production management team went through over those 10 days, it's just mind-blowing. I mean, I think we accredited 4,000 people over 10 days. I think and across BBC Studios, I mean, it's we're a much wider team. Everybody came on board. And it's the one period of 10 days that no matter what question you asked, you got yes, which is lovely. But I think they put calls out to 3,500 freelancers to see who would be available. I mean, we literally went on air the following day with the King's Address, the day after that with a 25-camera OB, to do the King's Proclamation, and it just rolled on and on. And everybody came together. But ultimately, we did have a plan. When we started to have rumblings that, the Queen was unwell on that afternoon, the first thing we did was look at our plans and ultimately look at who we were planning to be where and where did we think they were. And then ultimately, I'll be honest, the production management teams owned it and ran it. Without them, we would not have got on air. From feeding people, making sure people could sleep, that they could drive in, they were remarkable. And I would say, yes, you then had the technical team that took their area, that were booking the OB trucks. It didn't all, that plan didn't all just fit into place. There were certain OB suppliers that didn't have the trucks you wanted, but the whole industry came together as one. And they were helping each other out. They were swapping resources, swapping cameras to make sure ultimately the UK, and at that point the BBC Studios team, delivered that funeral. So whilst we had the basic plan, it was you ran with it, but everybody came together as well.
Thank you for your questions, especially thank you to the panel who've been illuminating and fascinating and are a pleasure to work with up here and also in the real world. Thank you very much.